Hello and welcome back to Rage Gaming and a new Elden Ring Things You Didn't Know series episode. Today we're looking at some really interesting details to do with certain characters and a certain storyline, as well as some interesting tips to do with different weapons, ashes of war, and incantations. So without any further ado, let's get into today's episode. To kick off today's episode then, we have a follow-up from last time. A comment from the user, The Weapons Hold. Now last time we talked about the very cool Clean Rot Knights and how they have a very unique effect, which is tied to something I run in a lot of my builds. In fact, in this one right now, successive hits. The Rotten Winged Sword Insignia, which we took a look at and read the description of. You know, basically when you land successive attacks, you get some red lines and that increases your AR. The more successive hits, the more damage you do. But apparently these insignia are tied to lore and in-game mechanics with the actual Clean Rot Knights. These knights actually get the same benefit. They are actually carrying the same insignia. They're using that talisman, meaning when they hit you 3 or 4 times, they get that buff. You see the red lines. They're now actually dealing more damage on hit, just in the same way that you would if you were wearing that talisman. So it's a pretty cool detail. And further, the lore of why they have that is really cool, and we discussed that. As they are literal badges, these talismans, insignia given to powerful Clean Rot Knights by Malenia herself. But there's a really important caveat to that I did not highlight last time that we should really go over. Now, Weapons Hold was the one who explained this, so I'm going to go through that. As you find and defeat a Clean Rot Knight in the Lakes region, quite early in that region, you will of course get the regular Winged Sword Insignia. Not the rotten one, just a regular one. Now this talisman, much like the rotten one, is essentially purified, pre-rotten, still depicting that same raised prosthetic blade, and still an honor bestowed upon the knights who fought alongside Malenia the Severed, which is a different description to the rotten one, which is an honor bestowed upon the Valkyries who serve the goddess of rot. An important distinction, and one I should have talked about last time. You see, this is the true insignia and true talisman that's given to Clean Rot Knights, where it's only the special sisters of Millicent who have and use this rotten version, specifically the Valkyries who serve the goddess of rot. It's talking about those 4 sisters who were born in the swamp of Aeonia and come under the faction of Gowry, who was working his plan with them. They too have this effect then, but it's actually the more powerful rotten version. As you follow that storyline, that's what you would see if you took the time to look at the 4 basically mini Malenias that are attacking you. But in that fight, you don't really have that opportunity. So lore-wise, we have the Clean Rot Knights and this version, this insignia that the impressive, most powerful Clean Rot Knights have, were given this by Malenia. Mechanically though, all Clean Rot Knights have that effect rather than specific knights, which is a shame, but only a little detail. Then it's the Sisters of Millicent who have the rotten, more powerful insignia. But then finally, Millicent has her own version here, the Prosthesis, which of course provides dex and the successive hit effect, but not nearly as powerful as the rotten version. But it's really cool that all of these characters, all of these types have their own special talisman, their own insignia, their own effects and combat ability, and there's different tiers and levels between these 3 and reasons why they each have them. So this has been a fantastic detail to actually look into for the series, and thank you again to Weapons Hold for clarifying and highlighting that. Now, to follow on from that, we actually have one really cool thing to look at today to do with the details of Malenia and Millicent's group. There's a fantastic Twitter account known as Slofsky2nd, which is essentially an alt account of Slofsky, it would seem, to dedicate to Elden Ring mainly. Now, within this post, we get a detailed look at Malenia and Millicent's connected characters. There's the main characters we know, but interesting, a proper look at the Sisters of Rot. You know, Gowry's attempt to create a new rot goddess that does not work, and Millicent's most promising out of all of them. Here we get to see the close-up and still of each sisters and how they've actually got some serious detail you might never appreciate mid-fight during the questline when you're actually fighting them. Each sister actually has different rotten patterns all over them, providing some uniqueness, as well as they're actually using different weapons of choice, all of course attached to that fighting style and faction that we see throughout the Clean Rot Knights and so on. In fact, even one of the sisters has something as subtle as one white eye. I guess that eye's blinded, right? The rot that's spreading but being suppressed and affecting them all in different ways. And I find this type of little detail fascinating. They put all of this effort in to make each of these sisters, each of these characters distinct in real subtle ways, but you would just never see that. You would never notice that playing normally because you don't have the time to stop and go, ooh, you've got an interesting pattern on your cheek, you know, while they're trying to kill you. It's all over so quick, you just don't have the time to look at them. You probably assume they're all the same as the Millicent model, and this level of little subtle detail doesn't exist, but it totally does, and it's thanks to Zlowski that we actually get to see that. Further in that post though, there's even a second set of images which show us some neat details to do with the Mariah's faction, but also Malenia and her different effects during the fight, such as Malenia without her helmet but pre-phase 2, which looks horrifying but is very neat, or those little summons that she throws at you when she's in her phase 2 in her goddess form. I really recommend the Twitter account in general though. There's a lot of detailed images and stuff like this that you'd normally miss, so I wanted to highlight this Twitter account in general for this series, so please check them out. Next up then, we have a couple important things to know if you're using certain incantations and Ashes of War, starting in fact with this Ash of War here, the Ice Spear, which I just have on the Clayman's Harpoon here. This Ash of War is a very powerful Ash of War, which I highlight in my Ash of War series. You are shooting out this Ice Spear, which allows for some Ice or Frost stats build-up, and it also has close to medium range in its effect, and it's quite thrust-based, which is a solid way to deal damage. If you are using this Ash of War then, it's important to understand how it works and how to actually get the most benefit out of it, because there's actually a couple subtle details to it that I only recently learned. For example, it actually has a hitbox at melee range. So when I'm doing this first part of the animation, the blue pop there, before I actually shoot the Ice Spear, I'm dealing damage. That twirl, that spin, is actually an attack. So ideally you want to use this Ash of War right up close, immediately upon the enemy. Like so. You see how I dealt 300 damage before the actual poke? Watch again. 339 damage before actually landing the attack. It's actually kind of like a point blank shotgun style hit, which will interrupt and stagger enemies, which is fantastic to know. Using this thing at close range is generally what you want to do because it's short range, but it's important to know that you're supposed to use it right up against the target to get the maximum effect. It's a two-part attack. And then secondly, the effect completely goes through shields. So while he's blocking, I can completely pierce that using this Ash of War. Now, it does block the sort of close range first part, you know, the spin, they block that, but the poke, the penetration of the Ice Spear shot, that goes straight through shields. They cannot block it. So it's actually a really good Ash of War for multiple reasons, multiple purposes. It serves a lot of different utility, and in PvP, if you're dealing with someone with a shield, it can actually be a top tier pick, which is probably going to raise my estimations of it when I go back through the Ashes of War, perhaps in 1.09 or a future patch. So I mentioned there's another thing that I want to talk about this time to do with the Sorcery though, and a sip to do with that. Now, you may know about the Sorcery, probably know about it, Eternal Darkness, which places this kind of vortex, this void above you, and this will absorb and draw in all magic and spells that are cast towards you or near it, sucking it in like a black hole. That's an incredibly useful type of magic, but one that's rarely actually used for some reason. Now, what I didn't realize is there's actually another effect to do with the moon sorceries that you get from Renala, and obviously we're using her staff, that actually works in the same way, which can be really beneficial but is rarely actually used. There was the full moon and dark moon sorceries that we're looking at here. I've got help from Josh, who's casting it towards me, sending this moon at me after a brief channel, much like Renala does in the fight. Now, part of the description of the sorcery is that it will actually absorb magic much like darkness does, but it actually works in an unexpected way. How I read that and how I understood that was that if it happens to collide with that moon, your magic, well then it would be absorbed. But the reality is actually different. It works like Eternal Darkness, but a moving one, and one that does damage and is tracking your enemy. So those three things are actually really good, despite the fact that this sorcery is very rarely seen in PvP. Using multiple shots with the stars, you can see how they're going to attack Josh there, but then they're pulled in to the moon instead, being drawn like a vortex. Then with other sorceries, of course, as they're colliding midair, it's just straight up being absorbed. It's just interesting to know that it actually will pull them and draw them into the moon, much like Eternal Darkness, much like a vortex or a black hole. So honestly, the full moon sorceries are an incredibly good pick, an incredibly good spell to use when you're facing another spellcaster in PvP, or in, to be fair, open world or PvE scenarios where you're going against a caster there. They are very powerful spells, but you only really see them used in PvE because they take a while to cast. But against other sorcerers, you should absolutely make use of it. It's actually very good. Alright, so our next one is to do with the Sentry Torch, which we've seen in the series and looked at before. It's a very important torch because it reveals those invisible enemies, the occasional black knife, but also, as we've shown in the series, when you don't actually have it actively equipped, like when it's on your back, it will still reveal the assassins, which is a very useful, important thing to know. But it was Reman Chen who's back once again with incredible tips for this series. Thank you so much for getting so involved, by the way. They were talking about the Beast Torch, which is a very important torch we've talked about in the series as well. The Beast Repellent Torch. Basically, when you've got this equipped, it will repel beasts. They won't want to go near you, they'll be too afraid. This also works on basilisks, which are also beasts, which is a very important thing to know, because they're a really annoying enemy type. But this is how it's supposed to work. But much like the Sentry Torch, even if you don't currently have it equipped, it's not even lit, it's just on your back, the effect still takes place. They're circling me, they won't come near me, and the beast effect occurs. Interestingly, I'm literally not in combat. Normally you can't fast travel when you're in combat, but when I've got this Beast Repellent Torch on, and they're clearly active and looking at me and want to fight me but don't dare come near me, they don't actually count as though they're in combat because I can still fast travel, which is a neat little detail. But this got me thinking about other details to do with that, and why does this actually work in the first place? It's true of other equipped items that have passive effects. So obviously the Blasphemous Blade, where you get the lifesteal on kill, is an obvious one, but there's other weapons out there, such as the Highland Axe, which gives you a enhanced raw effect. So any raw, be it actual damage or whether it's one of those buffing ones that gives you a new moveset, by simply having this equipped, it will make them stronger. But part of many builds that we're running recently with raws, the Highland Axe works anyway when it's equipped but not currently being used. So you two-handing a weapon like my recent hammer build, the Highland Axe is on my side, I'm doing a raw, and I'm still getting the benefits of having the Highland Axe equipped. Even though it's not currently being used or held, technically it's active despite that. Further, something like the Sword of Milos, which gives you a passive FP restore whenever you kill an enemy. Even when it's on my back, so I'm not currently holding it, I'm still going to get that FP restore. As you can see, when he dies, we get the blue effect. I'm still getting the FP restore, even though I'm not holding the blade or using it. It's technically not equipped, but because it's in my equipment page here, it's there, it's working. It seems to me that any item, any weapon that has a passive benefit or effect, as long as it's technically in your equipment screen, it will give you that effect, which is a really good tip to know for your general gameplay, many builds, and the open world playthrough that you might be going through. Whether you're dealing with beasts, but obviously you want to two-hand your weapon, you still get the effect. Or you've got the Sentry Torch on because you're revealing an invisible enemy. Or you're looking for lifesteal or FP restore, or the other passive effects on different weapons in the game. You can just have it on your back and get the benefits, which is really nice to know. So a good tip, thank you Reman, and getting me thinking about that. But there you have it, another episode, another things you didn't know episode down. I hope you found that interesting or useful. And as always, if you guys have anything along these themes, whether it's lore, whether it's small details, whether it's mechanical stuff like some of the stuff we looked at today, if it's something we've not talked about in the series or further something that we have, then let me know in the comments. You might just make it into an episode, and of course, I'll shout you out. For now though, I've been Hollow, you've been you, thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.
Josh, Cotton, and Hollow with the videos, dropping the humor like a hammer on your tippy toes, bringing entertainment on a daily arrangement to take our insanity and turn it into entertainment. Yes, I said entertainment twice, to reiterate that it is nice to look into your faces on a mostly daily basis when you let us in your homes to make the whole world a stage. Goodbye.